Yo ho ho, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I hope you're keeping well. So I'm going to be talking you through my most anticipated horror releases for summer 2025. And as usual with these videos, I'm going to be going by the European release date because that's the release date that's relevant to me. And if you just want to skip to the upcoming releases, I will have timestamps down below. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first up, we have a book by DiLouie called My Ex, the Antichrist. I think this sounds super interesting because it follows a band, and I love horror stories that center around bands. The synopsis really gives me Jennifer's Body type of vibes, and I freaking love that. So the story starts out in 1998 and it follows a band, and we're following our main characters Lily and Drake, who are kind of like the band leaders. Then the story jumps to 1999 where the band are performing and there ends up being a horrible riot that ends in a couple of deaths. Even after this notorious show, their infamy and their hype keeps building, and it all culminates in 2009 where Lily, at the height of her fame, decides to walk into a police station and confess to murder. So the band have always refused to talk about what happened the night of the riot, but going from Lily's confession, they decide to finally start exploring the moments that took place on that infamous night. To me, this sounds like a really fun sort of horror novel. It sounds like something that doesn't take itself super seriously. Even though I have yet to read anything by DiLouie despite having all his previous released books, I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on this. Next, I want to talk about Basilisk by Wixey. So I have seen some really positive early reviews for this, and it sounds like a really interesting weird sort of tale that doesn't sound like the stereotypical sort of horror novel that I would naturally gravitate to, but it has elements in it that I feel like I've only ever seen in films and TV shows. So I think reading this sounds like really good fun. So the story follows Alex Webster, who is known as an ethical hacker, which is a term I've never really heard of before, but she hacks for the greater good, supposedly. So herself and a colleague stumble across this really mysterious game on the internet, and immediately, as a puzzle solver, she decides to just crack into it and see if she can solve the mystery of this game. The game was created by a shadowy figure who they have heard about in passing, but only really know him to be a legend. And together with a colleague, Alex starts working through these mysterious, bizarre puzzles. But once they start working away, they end up being pursued by an anonymous group known as XXXXXXXXX. I don't know, there's a lot of X's in it. And their goal is to stop Alex from completing this game, because on completion, she will find out something incredibly dangerous that needs to remain a secret. It needs to be destroyed. And for all we know, it could be like the end of the internet or the end of the world as we know it. I don't really read a lot of what you'd consider, I guess, cyber horror or horror that's related to computers, but it is something that I want to read more from in future. So this is another one I'm really looking forward to checking out, and I think sounds pretty cool. Another book that I've been really looking forward to getting my hands on is The Starving Saint by Starling. This is a medieval horror, and it centers around this castle that's been under siege for 6 months. And when it seems like they're at their very end, their stockpiles are running low, and there seems to be no way that they're going to be able to remain in this castle for much longer, these mysterious saints show up and replenish the stock and heal the sick, and they just seem to be able to mysteriously get through the barricades and into the castle and just enlighten everyone. But these saints seem to be a little too good to be true, and 3 women within the castle walls see them for what they really are, and between them they decide to hatch a plan in order to save the people within this castle and get rid of these so-called saints. Personally, I love medieval horror. I feel like it's a really interesting subgenre to explore because it usually has characters in it who are absolutely detestable and will do completely unbelievable things in order to get one over on each other, in order to get into positions of power. And I just think that's really interesting to read about. So this was another one that I had to just immediately put on my to check out list. The next book is actually a debut horror. It's called How to Survive a Horror Story by Mallory, Arnold. I was a little bit skeptical of this at first just because I thought it had a little bit of a generic title, and I feel like we've been getting a lot of horror releases about how to survive this or how to XYZ or whatever. And once I read the plot synopsis of this, I was like, actually, I should give this a shot because it sounds interesting. It follows a group of writers who have been invited to hear the last will and testament of a really famous author that they all look up to. They all seem quite surprised that she's left something to them. They all have a unique connection to the author, and that's why they feel there's going to be something special that they receive from her. But once they hear the will, they learn that they're going to have to go to her very large manor estate and play a game. And the game seems simple enough, but it has very severe consequences. Essentially, they are to go into a room in this manor and solve a riddle. And then if they solve it, they progress into the next room and do the same thing. And progress and progress and progress. But it turns out that this estate has a very sketchy history, and those who don't progress will most likely be sacrificed to the house itself because it hungers for blood and bone. Escape rooms / locked in horrors are something that, again, I don't really read about. I feel like I've watched a lot of films related to that, but I haven't really read much of that. So even though the title is a little bit generic, I want to give this a go because it might be a hidden gem. Then we have a really anticipated release by many in the horror community. We have the new book by Silvia Moreno-Garcia called The Bewitching. This is described as folk horror meets dark academia, which sounds interesting enough to me. I have said in the past that I'm a little bit burnt out on the whole dark academia genre for the time being because I feel like a lot of the stories are kind of samey, but I feel like this will bring something new to the genre, hopefully. So the story follows a young woman named Minerva who grew up on her abuela's stories of witchcraft and wonder, and these were stories that scared her but excited her so much that as an adult she ended up studying horror literature for university, and that's what she's writing her thesis on. She's focusing in on one particular author of notoriety, and this author is called Beatrice Tremblay, and funnily enough she's actually studying at the same university that Beatrice studied at, and she decides to write her thesis on Beatrice's most famous work, a book called The Vanishing, which as she begins to study she learns is based loosely on true events. And the story follows a student at the very same university who went missing many years ago. Minerva begins to get obsessed with the story, and as she delves deeper and deeper into the history of the college, she starts to feel the same dark forces that Beatrice felt when writing The Vanishing. And she soon realizes that the stories that her grandmother told her while she was little may actually be based in true events, and she seems to be armed with the right knowledge in order to deal with whatever malevolent forces are at play in this university. To me, this sounds like the perfect witchy supernatural read to pick up over autumn this year, and that is exactly what I'm planning to do with it. Another book that I'm looking forward to is the second installment in the Bless Your Heart series, which is called Another Fine Mess. So the first book focused on vampires and this one focuses on werewolves. And I really need to read more werewolf horror because it's quickly becoming one of my favourite subgenres. So in this installment we are with the Evans family, and their family has gotten smaller and smaller over the years, and there's only 2 remaining family members who are still trying to keep the vampire population in their small town at an all-time low. But on top of dealing with the undead, they learn that there may be a werewolf on the loose. Together with the sheriff of the town, they put their heads together and dive into a lot of family lore in order to figure out who this werewolf may be, how to stop them, and you know, all the good stereotypes that go along with the whole werewolf trope. It's been described as Steel Magnolias meets Buffy, as it's set in the 1990s and it's got those kind of witchy vibes to it, and honestly that's good enough for me. Another book that has been on my radar for a while and that I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on is One Yellow Eye by Leigh Radford. This sounds like a really unique zombie story, and I want to read more zombie stuff in the future because I love zombies as a subgenre. I've watched pretty much all the zombie stuff you can possibly watch, and I still want more. So I'm going to start reading about it. So the story follows a female scientist who has been tasked with finding a cure to this zombie virus that has broken out and devastated the world. And she's really invested in finding a cure for it because her husband may have been bitten by a zombie, and he may actually be the last remaining person to have been bitten by one, and she may have him tied to the bed in the spare room. So she selfishly wants to find a cure in order to bring her husband back. And the thing is, he's not quite dead yet, and she has been stealing supplies from work in order to drug him and keep him docile. But her time is running out, not just to save her husband, but to save herself and make sure that she's not found out, because people are getting suspicious. So this to me sounds like a sweet zombie love story, and like how far someone will go in order to protect the one they love. I feel like there's a lot of good, positive feelings around this, but I'm hoping it delivers on the zombie descriptions and the general gore that I would associate with this subgenre. The next book that I'm really looking forward to is The Library at Hellebore by Cassandra Khaw, because I have been really impressed by Cassandra Khaw's writing style. I think her prose is really strong, and I'm just really looking forward to the atmosphere that she's going to be bringing in this book. It's described as a cosmic horror meets dark academia. This follows a young woman who is basically kidnapped and enlisted in this institute. It's called the Hellebore Technical Institute for the Gifted, and it is the premier school for those who are dangerously powerful. So we're talking about like old gods and Antichrist and, you know, end of the world bringers basically. And everything seems to be progressing okay up until graduation day, when suddenly the faculty go on a ravenous rampage. They go absolutely crazy, and the students find themselves trapped in the library of the institute. So in order to appease the faculty and to stop them breaking down the doors and killing them all, our main character realizes that they're going to have to give a human sacrifice every night. So the group is getting whittled down night after night after night, and it just sounds like an interesting story of survival. It kind of gives me vibes of, obviously, the film The Faculty, and I just think this sounds kind of interesting. I love the inclusion of cosmic horror in this, and I really hope the cosmic horror is cosmic horror-y. A book that I think sounds really interesting and quite mysterious, and it may more so lean into kind of literary horror, is Mayra by Nick Gonzalez. So this is a story of two young women who were childhood best friends but then drifted apart, and one of them contacts the other one and invites her on an interesting, lavish weekend getaway. And instantly our main character jumps at the proposal, but things start to get tricky when she also includes bringing her boyfriend down. And even though there is a lot of nostalgia when meeting her old best friend, quickly they remember the old disagreements that they had and the reason why they stopped talking in the first place. The story is set in the Everglades, and the swamp is very much a big part of the story from what I can tell. But soon enough, our main character starts to lose her sense of time and things begin to shift, and there may be something incredibly odd actually going on in this area that they found themselves in. Personally, I really enjoy stories that focus on the dynamics of female friendship, because female friendship, especially when we're focusing on childhood friendships that then fractured and then try to be regrouped later on in life, are incredibly difficult and tricky. I just think it's a really interesting topic to explore. So this is one that I feel like is going to be one of the kind of slower, quieter reads, but I really do hope it delivers on the horror. The next book that I have on my radar that I think sounds really interesting is a short story collection called The Atlas of Hell by Nathan Ballingrud. So this is a collection of 6 stories. So we have the main story, which is about a rare book dealer from New Orleans who's on the hunt for an atlas that may have been dragged up from hell itself. There's a story about a bartender who wakes up in a living hell. There's a tale about a group of people on a voyage who are intent with having a conversation with the devil. And these tales all sound kind of hell and Satan adjacent from what I can tell. So I know that in Europe, some of Nathan Ballingrud's works haven't been picked up by European publishers yet. So I don't know if this is a collection that is new to all of us, or if it's something that got released in America a couple of years ago and we're only getting a printing of it now. But regardless, I'm really looking forward to it. And then the last July release that I'm looking forward to is Angel Down by Daniel Kraus. So at first glance, I didn't think that this book is a horror novel, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there are horror elements in it that do make it qualify, in my opinion, as a horror book. So the story is set in the trenches of World War I, and we follow a private who does anything and everything to survive this abysmal situation that he finds himself in. And that includes screwing his own men over in order to ensure his own survival. But at a certain point, he's pulled up with 4 other grunts to be sent on a mission, and this mission is to go into a perceived no man's land where they are given orders to kill a wounded comrade. But what they end up finding on this battlefield isn't the man that they expected. It seems to be a fallen angel that was hit and wounded by stray artillery fire. And this being may be much more valuable to the men than they realize. It holds the ability to potentially end all the conflict, but the men really have to focus on looking inward and making sure that their own lust for power and their own greed and just their own selfishness doesn't ruin this encounter with this being. It's not typically the type of story that I would gravitate towards, but obviously Whalefell got a lot of incredible reviews and this book has a lot of hype around it, so naturally I'm going to be a little bit curious about it. So for the month of August, we don't have too many new releases coming out. So the first one is Who is the Liar by Laura Lee Bahr, and this is coming out on the 1st of August. This sounds interesting enough. It's set in the 1980s and it's about a town that has a serial child killer on the loose. And our main character is Topaz, who is a 10-year-old girl, and she's been sworn to secrecy by her older sister, who's convinced that she's actually caught this killer and he's currently locked up in their basement. And when her sister brings her down to the basement to meet this monster, Topaz realizes that this man is actually someone she knows. It's a man from their church, and he's tied up and he's been beaten and he is just begging to be released. And he tries to tell Topaz that her sister has got the wrong person and that she's lying to her. And this is something that really captures her imagination, because her sister does lie to her and she enjoys pulling pranks on her and she enjoys scaring her. So it becomes a game of who to believe. Does she believe this man who's seemingly begging for his life and hoping that he'll be released? Or does she go and believe her sister, who supposedly has her best intentions at heart? And it becomes a kind of like whodunit sort of situation. So it's a lot to deal with for a 10-year-old child. So what I think this novel has going for it is that, one, it's set in the 80s. I'll read anything that's set in the 80s. I love that kind of 80s, 90s nostalgia vibe at the moment. But I also think it's interesting that it's told through the perspective of a 10-year-old and we're getting all this information filtered through like 10-year-old eyes and stuff. So again, not a novel that I would usually go for because I generally try to stay away from stuff relating to kids, but I think this does sound interesting. Next is The Farmhouse by Chelsea Conradt. This is coming out on the 7th of August, and this sounds like a classic descent into madness story. So this story follows our main character Emily as herself and her husband move into a farmhouse in Nebraska. Emily's mother has recently died and they've decided to move their life from San Francisco into this old farmhouse. This is meant to be a new beginning for them, a place for them to potentially start a family. There is a sense though that they're kind of sticking their head in the sand about certain situations. And after they move in, Emily discovers some of the history of the house and she learns that 3 years ago a girl who lived in the house went missing, and that after that the girl's mother mysteriously died. And she starts to dig deeper and deeper into the history of the house and the history of those who have owned it, and she learns that this house doesn't really favor women. It seems that a lot of women have met their end some way, somehow, through living in this farmhouse. After a while, Emily begins to feel that she's being taunted by this farmhouse. She believes that she can hear her mother's favourite music drifting over the cornfield, and she starts having visions of blood tracks throughout the house. So there's definitely something amiss with this old farmhouse, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be this couple's happily ever after that they hoped they would get. I don't know, I enjoy creepy rural farm stories. I enjoy books that focus on isolation. So I think this is going to be a novel that I enjoy. Next is What Hunger by Catherine Dang. This is coming out on the 12th of August and it's already received some really positive reviews online. Funnily enough, this is another book that's been compared to Jennifer's Body, so immediately with that comparison I'm in. So this story follows Ronnie, our main character, who is the daughter of Vietnamese parents, and she's very much trying to deal with the weight of her own family trauma on top of the difficulties of being a teenage girl. And her parents have already started getting the ball rolling with her being sent off to college, which is a thought that Ronnie finds absolutely anxiety inducing. Her parents don't really talk about their past all that much. and the story very much focuses on the food that they prepare for Ronnie. So in that sense, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker. But through her parents' past trauma, she learns that meat is a luxury and it's not to be taken for granted, and she ends up developing an insufferable hunger for human flesh. So I think the story sounds fantastic, and I feel like there's always space for more female rage / cannibalistic style storylines, and I'm really looking forward to this. Next is a controversial one, but I feel like it should be included based on the fact that it is an interesting upcoming horror release, and that book is Playground: Child of Divorce by Aron Beauregard. So this is an extreme horror novel, and it's actually the follow-up to the first book, Playground. So this book is basically Saw meets a playground. It's a playground that is essentially a massive trap and that no child can get through unwounded. That's why the story was so controversial when it came out, because it did focus on children, but a lot of people in the extreme horror community did seem to give the story a positive review, and it is one that I've been meaning to check out the next time I pluck up the courage to read some more extreme horror, which will probably be in October. But the story of this follows a mad woman. She is essentially super wealthy, and with immense wealth she has immense boredom, and she realizes that there's one thing that her wealth can't buy her, which is the ability to have a child. So this thought really drives her demented, so much so that she decides to pool all her money into this playground from hell, essentially. So with the construction of her newest playground underway, she decides to take several children from a poor, broken family background in order to start out the games early. And you know, these kids have already had it hard enough growing up in the environment that they had, and now they realize that their problems have gotten a whole lot worse. The story does feature certain characters from the first book, so if you didn't get enough of these absolutely reprehensible characters the first time around, we get to enjoy them all over again. So yeah, this is probably the most controversial book that I'll be featuring, but I just thought I'd mention it just for those sickos out there. The next release that I and a hell of a lot of other people are looking forward to is The Possession of Alba Diaz by Isabel Canas, and this is coming out on the 19th of August. So this is a historical fiction horror, and it's set in the year 1765, and a great plague has swept the land. And it follows our main character Alba as she flees with her parents and her husband in order to hide and find refuge in her husband's isolated silver mine. After she gets there, she starts having hallucinations and convulsions and starts to sleepwalk. She's either contracted some sort of illness after getting to this mine, or then there's something in the mine that's making her sick. And the thing that's making her sick may actually just be a good old demon. So this story revolves around the occult, the church, forbidden secrets, and the toll that all that takes on our main character. Another subgenre that is probably in my top 3 of all time is the possession genre. I will read absolutely anything that's related to demon possession because it is something that genuinely terrifies me. Even though I'm not religious, it's a notion that really disturbs me and creeps me out. So I have really high hopes for this one. So those are all the books that are currently on my summer release radar. Let me know if you're planning to read any of these, or if any of these have piqued your interest. And if there's a book that you're looking forward to that I haven't mentioned in this, feel free to drop a comment below recommending it. If you want to keep up with me outside of YouTube, you can always follow me on my Instagram and my TikTok, where I make short form bookish content that I don't really share over here. And if you haven't done so already and you like these types of videos, feel free to like and subscribe because it really helps my channel out and I greatly appreciate it. And as always, I hope you really enjoyed this lofty new releases video, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.